They grew them. Deep underground on their home planet Orenseith, the Velhari had huge root systems called Nemovines that kept their shared memories in living material. Every experience, every council decision, every war, every apology, all stored like a scar on skin. You did not read the archive. You touched it. You felt it flood through your nervous system like cold water finding every crack. The oldest Nemovine was called the First Sorrow, and no young Velhari was permitted to touch it. Not because it was fragile. Because it was too honest. Elder Sovareth had touched it once 40 years ago. She still woke up some nights with someone else's grief sitting on her chest. She was thinking about that grief now, standing at the edge of Orenseith's upper observation platform, watching a small vessel descend through amber clouds, a vessel that did not belong to any of the 17 recognized civilizations in their diplomatic registry. It was asymmetrical, patched in 3 places with materials that did not match the hull. One stabilizer fin was slightly bent, compensating in real time with microcorrections that her navigation analyst described as chaotic but functional. Her second, a young male named Daskai, stood beside her holding a data slate he kept forgetting to read. The signal they sent, he said. It was not a formal greeting. It was not a territorial declaration. It was not a trade request. What was it? Sovareth asked. Daskai looked at the slate as if it had personally offended him. It was a question, he said. They asked if we had anything to eat. Sovareth closed her 4 eyes, 1 pair at a time, her species' version of a slow blink, the gesture that meant I needed a moment to decide whether the situation was funny or terrifying. She had read the archive warnings about humans 7 times in the past decade. Not because she was assigned to. Because she could not stop. The elders had pressed those warnings with unusual care, not the cold, factual tone used for predator species, not the cautious diplomatic language used for rivals. The warnings about humans were written in something closer to bewilderment. As if the elder who recorded them had never quite recovered from the encounter. She remembered one passage in particular, pressed into the Nemovine with trembling urgency. They are not dangerous because they are strong. They are dangerous because they do not know when to stop caring. At the time she had not understood what that meant. She was beginning to now. The human's name was Mara Solano. She was 34 years old, a deep field systems engineer aboard a long-range survey vessel called the Provisional, which was an ironic name for a ship that had been operational for 11 years without a scheduled port call. She had brown skin, short hair she cut herself, and a habit of talking to machinery in a low, reassuring voice, not because she believed machines had feelings, but because she had found, over years of field work, that the act of speaking calmly kept her hands steady. She was not the captain. The captain was a cautious, methodical man named Yusuf who had, upon detecting the Velhari world, immediately begun drafting 17 versions of a formal first contact protocol document and was currently on revision 9. Mara had sent the food question while Yusuf was on revision 4. She did not do it to be reckless. She did it because their nutritional recycler had been degrading for 6 weeks, and the crew of 9 was eating food that tasted increasingly like the memory of food, and she was tired, and the planet below them was clearly inhabited, and sometimes the most honest thing you could do in an impossible situation was simply ask. Now she sat in a small descent pod, alone because Yusuf had insisted that only one person go, to minimize perceived threat, watching the amber atmosphere thicken around her. She had a translation device clipped to her collar, a bag of tools she carried out of professional habit, and a thermos of the recycler coffee, which was terrible but warm. She was nervous. She would not have admitted that to Yusuf. But her left knee was bouncing, and she caught herself murmuring to the pod's descent thruster in a low voice. You're doing fine. Just keep the angle. Don't wobble. The thruster did not wobble. She landed in a clearing that had been prepared for her, flat, open, and ringed by structures she could not yet categorize. And standing at the edge of it were 4 beings who looked like nothing so much as tall, slow-moving trees that had decided to try being people. Bark-like ridged skin. 4 eyes arranged in 2 pairs, each pair capable of independent focus. Limbs that were too long, jointed at unexpected angles, moving with a liquid patience that made her own skeleton feel overcomplicated and rushed. One of them stepped forward. Mara stood up from the pod. They looked at each other. The translation device at her collar was picking up vibrational language. The Velhari did not speak with air and vocal cords but with resonance generated deep in their chest cavities, felt as much as heard. The device hummed, processed, and produced. You are smaller than the archive suggested. Mara blinked. The archive knew about us? The being's 4 eyes rearranged themselves, 2 pairs shifting in opposite directions, in what Mara would later understand was the Velhari expression for a complicated, not quite comfortable truth. The archive, it said, has always known about you. Sovareth did not take Mara Solano to a meeting room. She took her to the Nemovine chamber. This was not protocol. Daskai had whispered 3 increasingly urgent objections as they walked, each one more procedurally correct than the last, and Sovareth had answered all 3 with the same response: I know. The chamber was underground, reached by a root tunnel that narrowed gradually until both of them had to walk single file, Mara in front, ducking her head, running one hand along the warm, faintly pulsing wall as if she couldn't help herself. Sovareth noticed that. The touching. The curiosity that didn't wait for permission. The archive warning had mentioned that too. They make contact with things before they understand them. Not from carelessness, from a need to know that begins in the body before it reaches the mind. The main chamber opened wide around them and Mara stopped walking. The Nemovines hung from the ceiling like curtains of braided silver root, each one slightly luminescent, each one holding compressed centuries. The room smelled like deep soil and old rain. It was by any measure one of the most sacred spaces on Orenseith. Mara said quietly, "It's like a library." "It is not like a library," Sovareth said. "A library stores information. This experience. The difference is that a library can be wrong. The Nemovine cannot be wrong. It only holds what was truly felt." Mara turned to look at her. What was truly felt can still be misunderstood. Sovareth had no immediate answer for that. She led Mara to a section of wall where a single isolated filament hung apart from the rest. Thinner than the others, older, its luminescence faded to something closer to dull pewter. "This is the human record," Sovareth said. "This was pressed by Elder Korithvel 112 years ago. She encountered your kind at the edge of the draft corridor. She survived the encounter. She lived another 30 years. In all that time she added nothing to this record, not a correction, not a clarification. Whatever she felt when she pressed this, she never changed her mind." Mara looked at the filament for a long moment. "What does it say?" "I will not touch it in your presence. It would take too long to explain what I felt and I would not explain it accurately." Sovareth paused. "But I will tell you what I remember from the last time I touched it." She turned to face Mara fully, all 4 eyes settling into the rare configuration her species used only for complete honesty. "It does not warn us that humans are violent," she said. "We have records of violent species. The warning for a violent species feels like incoming weather, pressure, threat, and the need to move. This record does not feel like that." She paused. "It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark, knowing the drop is real, and being unable to determine whether the thing beside you intends to push you, or has simply not yet noticed you are there." The room was quiet. Mara said, "That's actually a pretty fair description of us." Daskai found them 40 minutes later with the expression of someone who had been professionally ignored and had made peace with it. "Elder," he said carefully, "the Thornwork situation has escalated." Sovareth straightened. "How far?" "Section 14 has gone cold. The resonance feeds in the lower district are failing. If it progresses to Section 11 before the cycle turn, we will lose thermal regulation for approximately 6,000 residents during the cold drop tonight." Mara, who had been quietly studying a secondary cluster of Nemovines she absolutely had not been invited to study, turned around. "What's a Thornwork?" Daskai looked at Sovareth with an expression that asked several procedural questions simultaneously. Sovareth answered them all by simply explaining. The Thornwork was the name for Orenseith's thermal distribution network, a system of deep-bore resonance channels that harvested geothermal energy and redistributed it through the city's root infrastructure. It was not mechanical in the way a human would understand machinery. It was grown, like everything Velhari built, and it operated by harmonic resonance, specific vibrational frequencies that caused energy transfer between organic conductive tissue. For 200 years it had functioned without crisis. 3 weeks ago, a subharmonic interference pattern had appeared in Section 14. The cause was unidentified. Every Velhari engineer with relevant expertise had analyzed it. Everyone's approach risked cascading failure across connected sections. The interference was subtle. Precisely subtle. It did not block the resonance. It answered it with a frequency close enough to the correct one that the system could not distinguish signal from echo. The network kept trying. The network kept failing. And every attempt to correct it from within the system added one more layer of resonance that made the problem harder to isolate. Mara listened to all of the conversations without interrupting. Then she said, "Can I see it?" She did not fix it immediately. This was the first thing that surprised Sovareth, who had half expected, based on nothing more than the nervous energy the human radiated, some sudden, instinctive intervention. Instead, Mara sat in the access chamber above Section 14's primary resonance bore. She sat cross-legged on the floor with her translation device on, listening to the Velhari engineers explain what they had tried. She asked very few questions. When she did ask, they were specific, about timing, about the interference's first appearance, and about whether the system had been modified in any way in the months before the problem began. The questions initially frustrated the engineers. The modifications were irrelevant, they said. The interference was the problem. Mara said, the modification is where the problem started, even if it looks irrelevant. 3 hours of records later, a junior engineer named Felsoa admitted, quietly, that 6 months ago the network in Section 14 had been extended, a small growth addition to serve a new residential cluster. The extension had been approved, completed, and certified. It had passed every resonance test. Mara asked to see the certification records. The test that had been used to certify the extension was accurate, for an isolated node. The problem was that the extension had not behaved as an isolated node once connected. It had introduced a natural harmonic of its own, grown tissue always did, slightly, and that harmonic had been close enough to the main signal to go unnoticed for months before it shifted into the frequency range that was now causing the interference. The system wasn't being attacked. It wasn't breaking down. It was harmonizing with itself in a way that produced resonance where there should be silence. It's singing, Mara said almost to herself. The whole network's been trying to correct something that isn't wrong. It's just a new voice it doesn't know how to include yet. Felsoa stared at her. The metaphor was not scientifically precise. It was also, somehow, exactly right. Here is where a lesser story would let Mara produce a tool, make an adjustment, and let the Velhari respond with admiration. That is not what happened. The solution Mara proposed was not mechanical. It was not a repair. It required the Velhari engineers to do something that went against their deepest professional training. Stop trying to correct the interference and instead change the main signal to include it. In other words, absorb the new frequency. Retune the entire network's base resonance to accommodate the extension's natural harmonic. This was a significant adjustment. The Thornworks base resonance had not been altered in its 200-year operational life. Changing it would require a complete reharmonization. Every node, every bore channel, every distribution thread. Done wrong, it would cause exactly the cascade failure they were trying to prevent. Done right, it would take 3 days and require every engineer in the district working in coordinated shifts. It would also, Mara acknowledged, be permanent. The network would be different afterward. Not better in any measurable output sense. Just larger. More complex. Carrying one more voice than it had before. The senior engineer, a bristled veteran named Korathsev, said it plainly, "You are asking us to change what we are in order to include something new." Mara met his gaze. "I'm asking you to let the network decide that the new thing belongs." Silence. "And if we are wrong?" Korathsev asked. "If the reharmonization fails and we lose thermal regulation across all sections? Then 6,000 people have a cold night instead of just one district," Mara said. "That's worse." "I'm not pretending it isn't." More silence. Sovareth, who had stood at the back of the room through all of this, said, "She is telling you the real risk, reducing it to make herself comfortable." Korathsev looked at the elder. Looked at Mara. Looked at the resonance readings still climbing on the monitor behind them. "Begin the first phase," he said. The reharmonization took 3 days and 4 hours. Mara did not sleep during this. She catnapped on the floor of the engineering chamber in 2-hour intervals, wrapped in a thermal blanket one of the Velhari residents had brought her without being asked. A woman with 2 small children who had heard there was someone working to keep their home warm and had appeared at the access chamber with food and blankets and a quiet, serious face that needed no translation. The Velhari engineers worked. Mara consulted, recalculated, caught 2 alignment errors in the second phase that would have caused minor cascade feedback, and spent the better part of the 3rd day in a long, patient argument with Korathsev about the sequencing of the final synchronization. They argued well. Neither of them conceded points they didn't actually lose. By the end of it, they had a solution that was better than either of their original positions. Doskai, observing from the doorway during hour 61, said quietly to Sovareth, "She is not trying to win." "No," Sovareth agreed. "Then what is she trying to do?" Sovareth watched Mara kneeling beside a resonance bore access panel, one hand resting on its surface, eyes closed, listening for something too subtle to register on instruments. "She is trying," Sovareth said slowly, to make the problem feel heard. Doskai did not have a response to that. The final synchronization was completed at the 4th hour of the 4th day. The interference pattern dissolved. The network's resonance reading settled into a new base frequency, fuller than the old one, slightly lower in tone, carrying the extension's harmonic folded cleanly into the whole. Section 14 came back online. Then 11. The thermal readings in the residential district stabilized. In the monitoring room, Korovtsev studied the readings for a long time. Then he placed one long-fingered hand flat on the Nemovine filament embedded in the chamber wall, the building's own small memory, and pressed the moment in. He did not speak. He did not need to. Sovarev found Mara on the observation platform that night. She was sitting on the railing with a dangerous informality that made Sovarev briefly certain she was about to fall, but she wasn't. She was balanced with the casual precision of someone who had spent years on vessels where a misstep meant vacuum and had simply recalibrated her relationship with edges. She was drinking her thermos coffee. It had been refilled, Sovarev noticed, with an Orenseith equivalent, a warm, slightly bitter infusion the residents drank through the cold drop season. Does it taste right? Sovarev asked. Mara considered. It tastes like someone understood what I needed and made an honest attempt. She paused. That's usually enough. They were quiet for a while. The amber sky had deepened to something close to violet, and the city below them actually hummed now with its retuned resonance, a sound low enough to feel in the sternum rather than hear with the ears. The archive warning, Mara said. The one about humans being dangerous because they don't know when to stop caring. She looked at Sovarev. How long have you known that was the wrong interpretation? Sovarev was still. I am uncertain I have ever been certain, she said carefully. Elder Korovtsev, the one who pressed the record, she met humans 112 years ago, Mara said. She survived the encounter. She never changed what she pressed. Do you know what happened when she met them? No. The record holds feeling, not narrative. I do, Mara said. Sovarev turned fully toward her. The Provisional's historical database pulled every contact log we have from that era. A survey team, 4 people, made first contact with a Velhari trade vessel at the Drav corridor. There was a navigational misunderstanding. A near collision. Your elder's ship suffered damage to its memory systems. Data loss, significant, irreplaceable cultural records. Mara looked down at the city. The human team spent 11 days helping repair what they could. They could not restore the lost records. They knew that. They worked anyway because the alternative was leaving. And your elder pressed the feeling of watching someone grieve a loss they didn't cause and refused to leave. A long silence. That is why she felt cliff edge, Sovarev said. Not a question. Because we might push you, we're not dangerous, Mara said. We're dangerous because once we decide something matters, we will stand at the edge of it with you whether you ask us to or not. And sometimes, she said quietly, that's precisely the wrong thing to do. Sovarev was quiet for a long time. And sometimes, she said finally, it is the only thing. The next morning, Doskai prepared the formal diplomatic report, the one that would go to the High Council, to the archive, and to the 17 recognized civilizations, describing first contact with the human species. He had expected it to be complicated. He had not expected it to be short. Sovarev reviewed his 12-page preliminary draft, handed it back and said, 3 paragraphs. He rewrote it. She read it. She handed it back again. 1. He stared at her. What is the essential truth we are pressing into the record? She asked. He thought about it for a long time. Then he wrote. A human vessel made contact with Orenseith. They were hungry and we fed them. Their network was different from ours and they helped us hear it. They did not ask for recognition. They asked if the thermal readings had stabilized. We told them yes. They said, good. Sovarev read it. Good, she said. She called in on the 3rd day, when the reharmonization was still underway and she was relying on Orenseith infusions and her own stubbornness. Yusuf answered with the voice of a man who had completed his first contact protocol document and was not sure anymore whether it was relevant. Status? He asked. We have full diplomatic access and provisional food resupply, and I've been helping their engineering team with an infrastructure problem. Pause. Did they ask you to? Not exactly. Mara. They needed help. Another pause longer. Are you being careful? She looked around the chamber, at Felsoa, who had brought her a second blanket without comment, at Korovtsev, who had argued with her for 4 hours and shaken her hand at the end of it with a grip he had clearly researched, because humans apparently shook hands, at the moving filament in the wall, which was probably already holding this moment somewhere in its root memory. "I'm being honest," she said. "Which is usually better." Yusuf was quiet for a moment. "I'm putting that in revision 14, he said. "Of the protocol document?" "Of the protocol document." 1 month after Mara Solano departed Orenseith, the provisional resupplied, its recycler repaired with components the Velhari fabricators grew overnight from a design schematic Mara had sketched on a piece of engineering parchment. Sovareth went to the moving chamber alone. She did not go to the human record office. She had not touched that one in years, and she was not ready yet to reconcile what she knew now with what Korithvel had felt then. She went to a blank filament, new growth, cultivated for new records, and she pressed something into it. Not the events. Not the engineering solution or the diplomatic report or the navigation facts. She pressed on the moment on the observation platform. The violet sky. The humming city. The human sitting on the railing with her thermos of almost right coffee saying, "That's usually enough." She pressed the feeling of being understood by something that should not have understood you. The feeling of a warning finally making sense. Not because it was right but because it was almost right, in the way that all old truths are almost right about new things. She pressed what it felt like to stand at the edge of a cliff in the dark and realize the thing beside you was not deciding whether to push. It was just present. Holding the same dark. Willing to stand there as long as you needed. When she withdrew her hand, the filament glowed with a warmth that the older records did not have. Das Kai, who had followed her, she had known he would, stood in the doorway. "What did you press?" he asked. "A correction," she said. "Not to Korithvel's record." Her feelings were true. But I added, context. The kind you can only get from standing in the same place 100 years later. Will future elders understand it? Sovareth looked at the warm filament. "Some of them," she said. "The ones who touch it at the right moment. The ones who are ready to feel something more complicated than warning." 3 years later, the provisional passed through the draft corridor again. Mara was still aboard. The ship had been refitted twice. The nutritional recycler worked perfectly now, which she took a quiet pride in, and the crew had grown from 9 to 14, which she took a different kind of pride in. She received a transmission. It was not from a recognized diplomatic channel. It was pressed through a relay she didn't have a registry name for, and it arrived as a vibrational recording, raw resonance, not translated. She plugged it into the translation device. It processed for a long time. Then it produced. "The Thornwork is well. Section 14 runs warm. We have grown the network twice more since you left. Each time we adjusted the base resonance before the new extension was complete. It is strange. It takes longer. The network is more complicated than it was. It sounds better. Felsoa asks if you still talk to your machinery. We hope you do. We have begun doing it ourselves. We are not sure it helps the machines. We think it helps us. The archive holds your name now, not in warning, not in diplomatic record. In the section we call, Things That Were Difficult to Feel and Therefore True. We thought you should know." Mara sat with the message for a long time. Then she put her hand flat on the console, the transmission relay warm from use, and said quietly, "You're doing well. Keep the signal clean." Outside, the draft corridor spread wide, amber and indifferent. She sat in it like it was home.